Although he never lived to see it published, the final book written by James Bond creator Ian Fleming was an immediate and enduring success. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was a children's fantasy story featuring a car with magical powers. Fleming's inspiration had been a series of aero-engined cars built by a playboy Brooklands racer, the last of which would one day gain a life and notoriety all of its own in the hands of a Welsh engineering genius. It would be a gross understatement to suggest that Count Louis Zuborowski was merely rich. His mother was a member of the wealthy American Astor dynasty, his father a Polish aristocrat. On his mother's death in 1911, the 16-year-old Louis inherited £11 million, around £1.3 billion today, plus a significant amount of US real estate, including 7 acres of Manhattan and several blocks on Fifth Avenue. He continued to live at Higham Park, the country estate his mother had bought near Canterbury, and from here he indulged his passion for motor racing on a limitless budget. With engineer Clive Gallup, Zuborowski built 3 racing cars based on modified Mercedes-Benz chassis, with large-capacity aero-engines. The cars were so loud that a local bylaw was reportedly passed prohibiting the Count from driving them within the Canterbury city walls. At Brooklands they were a sensation, setting many circuit records and all earning the nickname Chitty Bang Bang. It seems the car's moniker may actually have come from a bawdy First World War song, which told how soldiers in France would obtain a weekend pass or chitty and go to Paris to visit the city's brothels, hence Chitty Bang Bang. For the purposes of explanation to genteel racegoers and the clerk of the course at Brooklands, the name was put down to the sound of the car's huge engines ticking over and backfiring. Zuborowski was developing a 4th car at Higham, this one powered by a truly massive 27-litre engine, when he was killed driving a Mercedes in the 1924 Italian Grand Prix. The 29-year-old Count's estate was sold, as were his legendary cars. Of these, the 4th was bought for £125 by a Welsh engineer and racer who was so passionate about motorsport he'd recently moved to live and work at the Brooklands circuit. Born in 1884, Welshman John Parry-Thomas was the son of a clergyman. A naturally gifted engineer, by his mid-20s he had designed and patented a hybrid electromechanical transmission which was used in trains, trams and buses. The principles of the Thomas transmission still form the basis of modern hybrid powertrains, and he's also credited with more than 20 other patents, including designs for vehicle suspension, brake servos and ignition systems. As chief engineer at Leyland Motors from 1916, Parry-Thomas designed an innovative aero-engine with its cylinders in an X layout. When the First World War finished before it could enter service, he moved on to develop the luxurious Leyland 8 with his assistant, Reed Railton. With a 7-litre 8-cylinder engine, the Leyland 8 was intended to be the finest motor car available, but it was also the most expensive and not many were sold. Having tested his own Leyland 8 at over 100 miles per hour at Brooklands, Parry-Thomas turned his engineering skills to motor racing. On leaving Leyland in 1922, Parry-Thomas moved to Brooklands, taking a number of unbodied Leyland 8 chassis with him, which he developed into the famous Leyland-Thomas Specials. Between 1923 and 1926, Parry-Thomas raced these cars very successfully and repeatedly broke records on the Brooklands track that ran past his front door. However, compared to his peers at Brooklands, Parry-Thomas was not a rich man. Racer Malcolm Campbell was the son of a diamond trader, while Henry Seagrave had the backing of the Sunbeam Motor Company. They both had designs on becoming the fastest man on Earth and could access the necessary machinery to do so, but in 1925 the land speed record was already approaching 150 miles per hour, out of reach of Parry-Thomas and his homegrown racing cars. The opportunity to buy Chitty 4, the so-called Higham Special, at a bargain price was the break John Parry-Thomas needed. Finally, he had a car with record-breaking potential. The car that emerged from the late Count's estate was crude but powerful. The 26.9-litre V12 Liberty Aero engine developed 400 horsepower with a 4-speed gearbox and chain drive from a pre-war Blitzen Benz. A long chassis built by Rubery Owen sat on large wire wheels and narrow tyres. Confident in the car's potential as a record breaker, Parry-Thomas began an extensive series of modifications. A new sloping radiator to a Leyland design with a remote header tank fitted near the cockpit helped to reduce the car's height. The engine received 4 Zenith carburetors, new pistons to increase compression, and Parry-Thomas fitted a new multiplate clutch he had designed and built himself. Finally, the car received a sleek single-seater body, enclosing the radiator at the front with a tapered tail at the rear. The bodywork was made by specialists Thrupp and Mabley, where Henry Dobson was one of the craftsmen working on the car. When Parry-Thomas met Dobson's 5-year-old daughter Ada in their workshop, he promised to name his new car for her. Ada Dobson's nickname was Babs. Parry-Thomas worked steadily through the winter of 1925, preparing his newly christened car for an attempt on Malcolm Campbell's 150 mph land speed record. By the spring of 1926, Babs was running well, and in testing the car at Brooklands, Parry-Thomas immediately set at least one record. Babs was the largest engined car ever to run at the circuit. Satisfied that he was ready for the challenge, Parry-Thomas headed to the Welsh coast. In early 1926, while John Parry-Thomas was preparing his car at Brooklands, fellow racer Henry Seagrave had raised the record to 152.33 mph on Southport Beach at his first attempt. With the Sunbeam factory's backing, Seagrave had driven a Sunbeam Tiger he'd named Ladybird, fitted with a 4-litre engine, developing just over 300 horsepower. Despite Seagrave's success, as John Parry-Thomas arrived at Pendine, he remained confident that he had a machine that could take the record. Despite a misfiring engine, Babs proved up to the challenge, and on April 27, 1926, John Parry-Thomas comprehensively broke the land speed record. With an average speed of 169 mph, he'd added 17 mph to Seagrave's record, but he felt the car could do better. Parry-Thomas worked overnight to cure the misfiring engine. The next day, Babs ran even faster, raising the record to 172 mph. John Parry-Thomas's success at Pendine had elevated the land speed record to a 3-way contest, and rivals Malcolm Campbell and Henry Seagrave already had big plans for the coming year. In November 1926, Malcolm Campbell's new Bluebird was unveiled. Sporting a 23.9-litre Napier Lion aero engine, Campbell's new Challenger was a beautifully engineered machine, purpose-built to take the record, in contrast to the somewhat agricultural Babs. Estimates at the time suggested Bluebird had cost Campbell 10 times more than Parry-Thomas had spent buying and improving Babs, but by the time Campbell's new car was ready, the record was already nearing Bluebird's 180 mph design speed. Meanwhile, there were rumours that Sunbeam were building a new car for Seagrave, powered by 2 huge aero engines. As autumn turned to winter in 1927 and the British weather closed in, the race for land speed glory was heating up. John Parry-Thomas was now the fastest man alive, and with Seagrave's new Challenger threatening to raise the record beyond Bluebird's reach, Campbell could not afford to wait for the spring. As 1927 dawned, Malcolm Campbell was not in the mood to waste time, but once again the winter weather had left Pendine Beach so wet that it was February the 4th before he was able to set a new record of 174 mph, fractionally faster than Babs had run in 1926. However, John Parry-Thomas had not been idle over the winter. Babs now had a lower profile thanks to a new radiator and bodywork that hugged the engine tightly, with 2 bulges accommodating the valve covers. With her wire wheels now covered by discs, a smaller radiator intake, and aluminium fairings covering the drive chains and the front edge of the rear wheels, Babs was almost unrecognisable as the high-end special Parry-Thomas had bought a couple of years earlier. With Campbell's new record less than a month old, Parry-Thomas arrived at Pendine on March the 1st, 1927. After waiting for 2 days for conditions to improve, and despite suffering from flu, on March the 3rd he decided he couldn't wait any longer. After a couple of test runs, Babs roared down the beach at over 170 miles per hour. With a new record within reach, Parry-Thomas turned the car around and raced back across the sands. Suddenly, as the car approached the end of the measured mile, Babs appeared to slew sideways. Out of control, the car rolled, landed back on its wheels, and skidded to a halt on the beach, flames licking round the engine. As they reached the stricken car, horrified onlookers found John Parry-Thomas leaning out of the cockpit at a drunken angle. Half of the driver's head was missing. The inquest that took place immediately afterwards suggested one of the car's wire wheels had collapsed and caused the accident, and that Parry-Thomas had probably been killed by a broken drive chain which had sliced through the car's fairing and inflicted terrible injuries. This was a sobering thought for the late Welshman's friend Henry Seagrave, who at that moment was on his way to Daytona with the twin-engine Sunbeam Mystery fitted with a similar chain drive. The full story of Henry Seagrave's 1927 Land Speed Challenge is told in this video on the Scarf and Goggles channel. What really happened to Parry-Thomas would never be fully understood, although Babs still had some secrets she would take to the grave. The car was respectfully buried in the sand at Pendine. With her final resting place unmarked, and Britain's Ministry of Defence later using the area as a rocket testing range, Babs was largely forgotten. John Parry-Thomas was laid to rest in Byfleet, Surrey, near to the Brooklands circuit. He was the first driver to die pursuing the land speed record. Sadly, he would not be the last. In 1969, 42 years after the tragic events on Pendine Sands, local lecturer Owen Wyn Owen located Babs and obtained permission to exhume the great car. As the world's press looked on, Babs emerged from the sand and was taken away to be studied and restored. As Wyn Owen worked on the car in his garage, Babs gradually gave up her secrets. Most significantly, he found that the fairings protecting the drive chains were intact, suggesting Parry-Thomas was killed as the car rolled over, and not by a broken chain, as was originally thought. It took Owen Wyn Owen many years to strip and restore Babs, steadily researching and sourcing parts from all over the world. The car ran publicly in various states of completion, until finally it was put on display at the Pendine Museum of Speed, where it was a prize exhibit. The decision was made in 2018 to demolish the old museum buildings and create a new Pendine Sands of Speed Museum, which is not yet complete. At the time of making this video in 2022, Babs is not on public display, although Owen Wyn Owen's son occasionally runs the car at events such as the Goodwood Festival of Speed. A touching postscript to John Parry-Thomas's life became public after his death. Being fond of children, he visited Great Ormond Street's Children's Hospital in London shortly before he died, and although he was by no means a rich man, he made several anonymous donations to fund a cot on one of the wards there. After his fatal accident, a public appeal by Autocar magazine raised enough money to maintain the Babs cot in perpetuity. Today, despite his considerable achievements as an engineer, inventor, racer, and record breaker, John Parry-Thomas is mainly cited as the first man to lose his life in pursuit of the world land speed record. He deserves to be remembered for much more than that. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe and check out Scarf and Goggles for more tales of record breaking. Click the bell icon and you'll never miss an episode. Until next time.